If you are an executive, business owner, and/or leader who struggles to produce your podcast more consistently, this video is just for you because we're going to talk about the importance of producing your podcast and the behind the scenes of the production. So if this is your first time here, welcome to the Failures Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Terryl Humphrey, and we're going to talk about today why podcast production matters. And I'll tell you, from being in podcasting over the last half a decade, I've learned the importance of producing a podcast, of editing a podcast, of uploading a podcast, of being consistent with a podcast. There's so many layers that goes on within a podcast, but to understand the production of the podcast, this video is going to explain that a little bit further. So first thing first, recording is not production. Not production. And what that means, you can't even see the video. Hold on. All right. So first point we're going to talk about is that recording is not production. Anyone can take out their camera. Anyone can take out their phone. Anyone can record anything. But that doesn't mean that you are producing anything. What it means is that you're just recording. You can record a lot of footage. You can record a lot of different podcasts. You can record a lot of conversations. But until you go into the production phase, which is editing, which is uploading, which is publishing, which is directing the conversation, it's so many different layers that goes into podcasting. I discovered while being on this journey, and I thought for a long time that recording was was production. Like once I record it, that's it. Once I have it uploaded, once I have it documented, that's all I need to do. As I started to learn more about the space, learn more about the industry, I started to understand the importance of production. Production is so important because it makes your video more entertaining. Reason why that's so important, because if your video, your podcast, your conversation is not entertaining, people are not going to watch it. My biggest struggle was trying to identify why people are not watching my videos, why people are not watching my podcast. And when I start to add a little bit of production, editing, and time behind it, I started to see a shift. The shift that I saw was that I was learning how to produce a podcast. Producing a podcast consists more of talking, consists more of a conversation, consists more of you communicating. It's everything that is not seen. When I started to recognize that podcast production is so critical to having a successful podcast, I started to take it more serious. As even though I can record a lot of different podcasts, I've had a lot of different conversations, the production doesn't stop right there. In fact, it starts because now you have to look at the footage, you have to edit the footage, you have to replace the footage, you have to make the video seamless so that it flows smoothly. When I started to see that shift, the production of my podcast has changed. The production of my podcast has shifted. The production of my podcast has become the focus of the podcast. Why? Because it's different just to have a conversation. It's different just to really talk about things. Where the weeds come from, where the challenges come from, is really making the video, the podcast, the conversation more entertaining. So I thought this whole time, I'm like, man, recording, like I can record anything, I can document anything. But in reality, here's the thing that I've learned: recording is just step number one. Step number one is recording. Step number one is recording. Every other step right after that, hold on, let me share my screen. Every other step right after that, I'm gonna put step etc. The editing, the publishing, the upload, the schedule, the time, the re-edits, the sound. Oh my goodness, the sound. You have so many layers when it comes to podcast production, and The sound is the most critical thing there is. Not only just recording the podcast, recording the production, recording the conversation. What it consists of is they really understanding like, wait, hold on. The podcast production is not just the conversation. It's everything that goes on behind it. I gave a presentation yesterday, and during this presentation, I was speaking about gaining more exposure through podcasting. And as I was speaking, I got a lot of questions that was like, what do you start with? I said, when I started half a decade ago, I started with my phone. And during that time, my phone was like all I had. And I was using what I had. And when I started to use what I had, I was like, all right, cool. I'm getting comfortable on camera. I'm learning how to be confident. I'm learning how to find things to speak about and share my story. What I didn't recognize was the challenges when I stopped recording. It's not, it's a game changer. Yet, if you don't understand the game that you're changing, it's going to be challenging. And so when I explained to him, I said, I started my phone. In fact, to this day, I still use my phone. In addition to that, I've added cameras. I've added more equipment. I got a microphone. I got lights. I upgraded the equipment because I wanted to improve the production. When I knew, well, I didn't know it was called production a while ago. Well, I'm like, if I'm having a conversation and the conversation is not edited, no, don't get me wrong, that you got the benefits of it not being edited, just as much you have the benefits of it's being edited. But I say this. Let's say you go on Netflix and you watching a movie, you watching your favorite show, you watching something that you like to enjoy watching. You go on Netflix and you watch the movie and/or what is called or and/or TV show. As you are watching the TV show, if the scene does not change, if the camera does not change, if the conversation does not change, if the music, I forgot about the music. If the music doesn't set the mood, the movie, TV show is going to be boring. When I started to learn about the podcast production and start taking class around editing, not necessarily just editing, but like, how do you make this video more entertaining? I saw that and I'm like, there's no way. There's so many different things that goes into production. It's not just about the cameras and recording. It's everything that comes after that makes your podcast more entertaining to watch and listen to. And so when I start implementing it for myself, I'm like, ooh, first I just thought I was learning how to edit. First I'm just like, all right, cool. This video is completely different than the ones that I've been making when I started. Why? Because I started to understand the importance of editing. I started to understand the importance of production. I started to understand, I'm like, all right, cool. I got a phone. Let me get a microphone. So now I'm learning about the microphones, and there's some good ones, there's some bad ones. Nonetheless, I remember getting my first microphone, and it was a wireless one. It was like one day I can clip on my pants and pull it up through the shirt and like have it right here. And when I did that, I was like, oh, I feel official. Here's the challenge with that. The audio did not come out good because it was a bad microphone. And the production, in order for your production to be good, people have to hear you. And so I'm like, dang, like now I gotta get another microphone. The podcast production, you're not just recording a video. This is not just a live conversation. This is not just a podcast. The production behind it matters the most because this is just step number one. Step number one is recording. Anybody can take out their camera, take out the phone and press record. But everybody are not editing their podcasts. What I've learned over the last half a decade and doing research on across different podcasts, people just upload podcasts. Not that there's anything wrong. I'm like, how can I be different? How can I be different when it comes to podcasting? Podcast production makes your podcast stand out. When I started to really focus on the production, I started to, Oliver, man, what to do, bro? Appreciate you for joining in. I started to understand. I was like, wait, hold on. Oh, hold on. Bro, I did a podcast with Oliver. You just made me remember. And the first podcast that I did with him, it was virtual. That was a virtual podcast. So you can't necessarily do that much editing. The second time I had a podcast with Oliver, shout out to Oliver, bro. The production was a lot better because I had multiple different angles. And I got to look for that video to see if I still got it. Oh, man. This is timely, bro. Oh, man. Hold on. The podcast production is more than just a camera. The reason why, because if anybody can record, when I started to record, here's the other epiphany. When I started to edit the podcast, I got more feedback. And when I got feedback, I was like, oh, it's working. But why is it working? So the reason why so many different things, so many different layers goes into production is because you have there's so many things to consider. There's so many, we need to catch up, bro, for sure. Shoot me a message. I'll hit you up once I get done with the live. And what that taught me is that the podcast production is more than just a conversation. It's more than just a recording. What it is that it's a what is it called? It's a craft. It's a talent. It's a skill. It's so many different things that it can be. I appreciate y'all for joining in. I'm on TikTok Live, Facebook Live, X Live, YouTube Live, and Twitch Live. And so I appreciate y'all for joining in. Let me know where y'all chiming in from. So what I discovered, I was like, hold on. It's more than just a conversation. It's more than just saying like, hey man, like I want to do a podcast with you. The work comes after the conversation. And when I started to understand this called production, in fact, today's the 29th, maybe Monday this week, I recognized I'm in the podcast production business. It's not just about the conversation. The conversation is easy. But what about everything that comes after that? What about the editing? What about the audio? What about the sounds? What about the effects? What about the lighting? The light of the camera, of the production. Like for instance, if I turn off the lights, like I turned off one light and the production is like different. Hold on, I turned off another one and it's different. And I turned off another one and it's different. The lighting is so simple, yet so important, yet so profound. The reason why is because when you are producing your podcast, you have to make sure everything is put together. And over the half a decade, as I started to learn, I was putting the pieces together. The production of the podcast became even more important. Failure's Knowledge Podcast became even more important than just the conversation. I had a call the other week, and during this call, I explained what to expect, what to look out for, and what you're going to receive. I got feedback. The feedback that I received was that other podcasters, other people do not do this. Like all the podcasts that they been on, they don't even do that. They don't take the time to really tell the story of the other person and give them digital assets, videos, trailers, whatever the case is. I'm like, well, I had to learn about that. And then when I discovered it was the production of the podcast, it made me stand out even more. It's making me stand out even more because now I have more focus. Now I have more clarity. Now I have more knowledge behind everything I'm doing. I'm no longer winging it. I'm no longer winging the business that I'm in. Why? Because now I have steps to follow. Now I have a system to follow. Now I have a blueprint to follow. And when I started to follow the system consistently, the podcast production became more better, like it improved drastically. It changed drastically because I've changed. And so the reason why I just wanted to say that is because why podcast production matters is because first thing first, podcast is not recording. Yes, you have to record, set your cameras up and everything of that nature. Nonetheless, the work comes after the recording. The words come after you stop recording. And when I started to like really understand everything that I was learning how to do, I was like, wait, hold on. It's not just a regular podcast. You're not just having a conversation. You're not just uploading videos. You are literally in production. And it was a game changer, bro. Oh man, this is great time. This is great time. And all right, so next point we're gonna talk about. So point number one, we just went over why podcasting is not, I'm sorry, recording is not production. Next point we're going to go over is how to set your production up. Hold on, I'm going to keep it simple. How to identify your production. How to identify your production. All right, so, you can't even see this. All right, right there. How to identify your production. That's the next point we're going to talk about. Ray, what it do, man? I see you this time, bro. right, so what we gonna talk about this time is how to identify production. Okay, when I started my phone. I had my tripod. I had like let's say 3 or 4 books. I had 3 or 4 books, and I had a small tripod. The tripod was probably the size of this tripod, this microphone stand. And when I had it, I was like, all right, cool. I'm just gonna start. That like my goal is just to start. The camera didn't even come up to my eye level, like it was literally lower, and I had to tilt it up. Like, hold on, I had to tilt it up so that way you can see it. Let me just draw it out. Hold on. Let me just draw it out. So this is me. I'm gonna put me. This is the tripod that I had. There we go. Can y'all see this? Oh yeah, y'all can see this. This is the tripod that I had. Very small. I had book number 1, book number 2, book number 3. These are books. And the tripod was short, and it didn't even connect with my eyes. Like I literally had to adjust it to where it was leaning. But when I started, I was like, all right, cool. I'm just gonna start. I'm just gonna figure this out. I don't want to have everything figured out, but I'm gonna figure it out on the process. When I pressed record, I was like, wow, I just recorded my first video. I felt good about it. I was like, oh, that's good. Then I was like, how people gonna see it? How people are gonna see this video? And then I'm like, all right, cool, let me get on social media. Uploaded the video, learn how to use the tools, and I uploaded. Second video came. I'm like, all right, cool. Same format. Got the books, got the tripod, set it up, and recorded. I recorded the second one. I was like, ooh, I feel good about it. And I remember when I was learning how to cook. I was learning how to cook when I started this journey. In addition to the story I just shared, I was learning how to cook. And what I thought, I was like, all right, cool. I'm gonna show different parts of the cooking. I'm gonna show me cutting up the vegetables, show me putting the vegetables in the pot, me cutting up the food and putting it in the pot, me cooking the pot, and I was just gonna show that. I didn't know it was called production, but what I did know it was called having different angles. The different angles that I was recording, it was like, all right, cool. I'm telling the story of the video. First, it starts with prepping your food. First, it starts with cleaning your food. Then it goes with cutting the vegetables. Then it goes to cooking the food, then preparing the food, documenting. And so I was learning how to have different angles of the video. Okay. Once I get done recording, I have all of this footage. Let's say, hold on. I have all of this footage, right? I'm gonna call this footage. Oh, I'm just keeping simple. I'm just calling it videos. I have all these videos. So now, since I have all these videos, what do I do with them? I'm like, how about I put them together? I put them together. And let's just say I had 10 videos. Hold on. Let's just say I had 10 videos. And the 10 videos has to be made into one video. So how do you do that? And I'm like, bro, I have no idea. I'm trying to figure out myself. At the time, was it called production? Because I didn't know it was called production. I'm like, well, how do I take 10 videos and put it into one? That's where editing, production, clipping the video, deleting some of the video, adding music comes into effect. What does this do? It makes the story more entertaining. Hold on. The reason why podcast production is so important because it makes the story more entertaining. When I started to recognize that I'm sharing a story of the meal that I'm cooking, and the meal that I'm cooking has the story behind it based off the videos that I've collected. In addition to that, based off the video that I put together, it's sharing the story. In podcasting, I've spoken to with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of leaders, a lot of executives, and they are sharing their story. You see, what matters is that when they share their story, in addition to that, it's how it's produced. It's how it's edited. It's how it's published. That's what make a difference. The story is one part of the interview or the conversation, but the work behind the scene is the challenge, because now you got to put it all together. And when I started to understand, I was putting it together. I was sharing the story. I was making their story entertaining. I had to learn what entertainment was. Production is more than just recording. The reason why podcast production is so important, because it tells the story of the person that you're interviewing. Anybody can have a podcast. Anybody can share a story. But for those who want to stand out within the 5 million different podcasters, the people who are editing up their podcasts, the people who are producing their podcasts, are the ones who standing out. There's a new podcast that came that I started listening to, and it's called Den of Kings with Kurt Franklin, and he brings a lot of celebrities onto his platform, and there's a lot of men who come on and talk about different problems that they struggle with, or not necessarily just problems, but they share the story. Imagine this, right? So, excuse me, let's just say they got 5 people there. Where's it at? Hold on. Let's just say they got 5 people there. 5 people. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you have 1 camera. Hold on. Then you have 1 camera. Let's just say this is the camera. Let's just say you have 1 camera and it's trying to capture all 5 of the people who are speaking, audios, visuals, facial expressions, and so on and so forth. You have 1 camera trying to capture 5 people. What if you have, same scenario, let's go with 5 people. But now, hold on. But now, oh, there's 4. Now, you have camera number 1. You have camera number 2. You have camera number 3. Keep it simple. These are cameras. These are cameras. Why is this important? 1 camera can capture 2 people. Another camera can capture another 2 people, and another camera can just capture 1 person. I started to understand the importance of production. I said, it's not just about the conversation. Yes, anybody can have a conversation. But the more you focus on the production, makes it entertaining. Why do 3 cameras make a difference than 1? Because 3 cameras can get 3 different perspectives. 3 cameras can get 3 different angles. 3 cameras can get 3 facial expressions. The reason why that's so important, hold on. The reason why production is so important, because it makes it entertaining. When I started to see the shift behind the videos that I was creating and what I was producing, I've learned that it's not just about recording. It's literally about telling the story of the people who sharing their story in a more effective way, more creative way, more inspiring way. And so when I start to apply that, I started to see the shift. Phase Knowledge Podcast is not just a regular podcast who don't produce their podcast. Phase Knowledge Podcast is a podcast who focus more on the production. Why? Because if I can share the story of the leader, business owner, executive that I'm learning from, their story would be more entertaining. And I was like, mind blown. So the last 2 points that we just went over. First one was that recording is not production. The second was that we just went over was how to identify your production, So the more cameras you have, the more entertaining it is. The last thing I want to talk about, okay, this one right here is a game changer. It is a game changer. This one right here Learn about your audio. Learn about your audio. The reason why I was at this event, and I was at InvestFest back in 2024, 2025. When I went, I'm starting to look at the cameras. I'm starting to look at everybody. I'm starting to see how they are moving, communicating, and doing business. There was a guy there who had a nice camera. This camera was huge. I asked him, I was like, so what's the biggest thing when it comes to like, it sounds like recording a podcast episode? He said the most important thing that you want to pay attention to is the audio. He said people will forgive bad video. People will forgive how the video came out, but people won't forgive the bad audio. So I'm like, why not? That was like people listen to podcasts as they're driving. People listen to podcasts as they're doing activities. People listen to podcasts as they are cleaning. Okay. When he gave me that response, I wasn't expecting that. I'm thinking he gonna talk about cameras, lightning, lights. Let's just say lights and everything else. But he talked about audio. When he talked about audio, it gave me a different perspective because it was something I wasn't even thinking about. I give you a prime example. For those of you that are on TikTok, you can't necessarily hear the difference. For those of you that's on everything else minus TikTok, here's the difference. I'm connected to the Rode. I have a Rode microphone, and I'm about to disconnect right now. Okay, I disconnected, and let me know in the comments if you can hear the difference. Let me know in the comments if you can hear the difference. You should be able to hear the echo, the room. In fact, I just heard it and I just disconnected. So I'm going to plug it back up. Let me know in the comments if y'all can hear the difference. Oh, okay, there we go. Let me know in the comments if y'all can hear the difference now. Why? Because the audio is what makes the podcast more entertaining. The audio, let me draw it out. The audio. Remember when I was younger, used to listen to a lot of music. Now I just listen to podcasts, conversations, and interviews. People they just say headphones. These are headphones. These are headphones. All right. People are listening. Listening more than watching. And I'm going to look up to some research data, some information that way I can back this up. Nonetheless, people are listening more, and when they hear the audio, it has to be good because people want to hear what you are speaking about. There have been countless amount of podcast episodes, podcast conversations where I've recorded, but the audio didn't come out. So now we had to re-record the conversation because I only had one recording device. What this taught me is that audio is so important. You have to really invest into the sound. People listen to your podcast because the conversation has to be entertaining. When I started to really focus on the production of the podcast, I'm like, man, I need to focus on the audio. I need to focus on the sound. I need to focus on what people are going to hear. Why? Because if people hear the conversation as smoothly as it needs to come out, people will be more entertained. I started to understand. I was like, oh, that's important. And it's important because if people can't hear what you're saying, people are not going to listen. Podcasting focuses on audio. Yes, you can have video podcasts. Yes, you can have audio podcasts. Nonetheless, they still both have to have audio. Both of them have to be able to listen to and heard and understood. When you focus on your audio, you start to pay attention to the devices that you have. The production has to be the focus both during the conversation and after the conversation, because during the conversation has to flow. The conversation has to be there and it has to be entertaining. And in order for you to do that, you have to focus on your audio. When I started to focus on the audio, the Phase Knowledge podcast started to shift drastically. Why? Because it's not just about the video. Yes, the video, lighting, all these different things are important. But the production of the audio is even more important because people have to hear you. People have to understand you. People have to connect with you. Yet they can only understand and hear you if you focus on the audio. And so this gave me clarity behind having producing a podcast or focus on the podcast production is because it'll help me stand out even more if I focus on the audio. And so when I started to understand, I'm like, all right, people are actually listening. People are actually like responding. Like, what the mess? They're responding because of the audio. They're responding because they don't hear background noise. They're responding because the production is the focus. And now that I'm like understanding and have more clarity behind the business that I'm doing, I want to be making more content around podcast production and how to stand out from your competitors or from other podcasters. So that way you not only have the tools, but you have the know-how so you can stand out with everything that you're doing. So just to recap the video, just to recap the podcast, why podcast production matter. We went over 3 points today. It was number one was recording is not production. That's step one. Everything else after that is everything that you have to focus on. The editing, the publishing, the upload, the schedule, the time, the re-editing, the sound, the audio, so on and so forth. The next point that we went over was how to identify your production. You can have 10 videos, and the 10 videos have to be made into one in order for you to tell the story. Your production has to tell the story of the video that you're trying to create. The last thing that we talked about was that you have to learn about audio. Audio is the most important thing there is when it comes to producing a podcast. If people can't hear you, people are not going to connect with you. If people are not going to connect with you, it's not entertaining. When you focus on the production of your podcast, your podcast will be more. It will be well polished for people to understand what you are speaking about. So let me know in the comments your biggest takeaway on why podcast production matters. Let me know. I'd love to read it. In addition to that, lastly, before we get off, you're one failure away. Hold on. Let me come to the camera. You're one failure away from changing your life. So don't be afraid to fail because failure is knowledge. I appreciate y'all. Hit that follow, hit that subscribe, and I'll see y'all on the next episode.